Today we're going to dig into a really fascinating court case from 1964. It's a story that explores the incredibly thin, blurry line between murder and a much, much lesser crime. It's got passion, it's got public humiliation, and a legal twist that is just stunning.
And it all boils down to this one really wild question. How in the world does a man get sentenced to death for murder, only to have that verdict completely flipped and walk away with a sentence of just 10 years?
I mean, just look at this. On one side, you have the trial court's verdict. The crime? Murder. The sentence? Death by electrocution. But then, the Supreme Court gets the case and everything changes. The crime gets downgraded to homicide and the sentence just plummets to a range of 6 to 10 years. So, to figure out how this happened, we have to start with the people at the center of it all.
At the heart of this case are two people, Guillermo Bello, who was 54 years old, and his 24-year-old common-law wife, Alicia Cervantes. You really can't understand the court's final decision without understanding their story first.
So, they'd been living together for about 4 years, but by 1958, things were starting to go south. Bello was having money problems, and he talked Alicia into taking a job as a hostess. Well, from there, things just got worse and fast. He caught her with another man, and then, on this one terrible day, May 20th, a series of public humiliations just pushed him right over the edge. First, her boss calls him an old invalid. Then, a little later, he's taunted in the street. And that very same night, he went to the bar, stabbed her, and immediately turned himself in.
And get this is the exact remark that was said to Bello in public that afternoon. It's so specific, so humiliating. The court later zeroed in on this precise moment as the key to understanding his emotional state. This wasn't just about simple jealousy. This was about profound, unbearable public shame.
Okay, so now that we have the backstory, let's get into the legal stuff. The first huge question the Supreme Court had to tackle was this: why wasn't this murder? And the answer is all about tearing down these things called aggravating circumstances. So, what is an aggravating circumstance? Well, think of it as an element that makes a crime worse, and because it's worse, it justifies a harsher punishment. To make a murder charge stick, the prosecution needed to prove at least one of these, and they came to the table arguing they had 4 of them.
First up on their list was treachery. Now, in simple terms, that means attacking someone in a way that's so sudden and sneaky, they have absolutely no chance to defend themselves. You know, like a plan to ambush from behind. So, was that what happened here?
The court's answer was a firm no. They said, look, even though one wound was in her back, it was all part of one single, frenzied, continuous attack. This wasn't some cold, calculated, hidden strike. It was a chaotic, emotional outburst. So treachery was off the table.
Okay, so without treachery, the prosecution moved on to their next point, evident premeditation. Did Bello plan this murder ahead of time? Had he already decided he was going to kill her?
And again, the court shot it down. They acknowledged his jealousy, sure, but they said there was zero proof that his jealousy had actually turned into a concrete plan to kill. And that knife he used? Turns out he'd been carrying it for personal protection for a long time. That just wasn't enough to prove he planned it.
All right, let's move on to the third claim from the prosecution. Did he use his superior strength to overpower her?
Now, this is where the court's reasoning gets really interesting. They said no. They actually pointed out that Bello was 54 and an invalid, while Alicia was just 24, in the prime of her youth. The court decided that there was no real physical advantage for him to deliberately exploit.
And with that, poof, the prosecution's entire case for murder just fell apart. No treachery, no premeditation, no superior strength. Without any of those, the charge couldn't legally be murder. So the crime was officially downgraded to homicide.
But wait, that only explains why the death sentence was gone. It doesn't tell us why the prison term ended up being so low. To understand that, we have to look at the other side of the coin, the defense's argument, that this was, at its core, a crime of passion.
This brings us to a mitigating circumstance, which is basically the opposite of an aggravating one. It's a factor that reduces a person's blame. The defense argued that Bello acted in a state of passion and obfuscation, which is a legal way of saying he was in a kind of temporary emotional blindness caused by an overwhelming trigger.
And this right here, this is the whole debate in a nutshell. The state argued that his rage was immoral because it was just jealousy over a common-law wife, not a legal one. But the court, they saw it completely differently. They ruled that Bello's desire for her to leave that life and come back to a monogamous liaison with him was a totally legitimate source of that emotional distress.
This quote from the actual ruling says it all.
The court is basically making a value judgment here. They're saying that his wanting her to be with him exclusively, even outside of a legal marriage, was not an unworthy passion. And that point of view was absolutely central to them accepting his defense. So let's put all the pieces together. How did all of this legal back and forth lead them to that final, very lenient sentence?
It's actually pretty straightforward when you break it down like this. First, the crime is homicide, not murder. Then, the court applies two mitigating circumstances. One, the fact that he voluntarily surrendered right away. And two, that passion and obfuscation we just talked about. So you've got two factors that lessen his blame and zero factors that increase it. The penalty had to drop, and drop significantly.
This legal math led to the final sentence, somewhere between 6 years and 1 day and a maximum of 10 years. I mean, that is a universe away from death by electrocution.
So what's the big takeaway from the case of Guillermo Bello? I think it's a powerful reminder that the law, at its best, tries to look beyond just the act itself. It makes a real attempt to weigh the messy, tangled, and powerful human emotions that can lead to tragedy.
And that leaves us with a really big question to chew on, doesn't it? This case from 1964 gave us one answer, but the debate is still very much alive today. At what point does an emotion become so overwhelming that it fundamentally changes the very definition of a crime?